These are the 3 weeks in March 1943 when Germany's most brilliant general recognized a dangerous new enemy and the fatal mistake his commanders made by ignoring his warnings. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, needed just 17 days to identify General George Patton as the greatest threat the Wehrmacht had faced in North Africa. The story begins on March 6, 1943, in the dusty command tents of Tunisia. The US Second Corps had just suffered a humiliating defeat at Kasserine Pass, losing over 6,000 men to Rommel's Afrika Korps. German High Command dismissed the Americans as soft, inexperienced, poorly led. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That morning, a new American general arrived to take command. George S. Patton, Jr. walked into Second Corps headquarters wearing cavalry boots, twin ivory-handled pistols, and an expression that could melt steel. Within hours, he transformed an entire army. Soldiers found themselves fined for not wearing helmets. Officers who showed up late to meetings got relieved on the spot. The message was clear. There was a new sheriff in town. Rommel, recovering from illness but still monitoring Allied movements, noticed the change immediately. German intelligence reported unusual activity in the American sectors. Increased patrols, aggressive reconnaissance, tank crews training through the night. This wasn't the same army that had fled at Kasserine. On March 17, just 11 days after taking command, Patton struck. His forces captured Gafsa without firing a shot, not because the Germans retreated, but because Patton's speed caught them completely off guard. Rommel studied the reports with growing concern. The Americans had covered 45 miles in a single day, faster than his own Afrika Korps could move. But March 23rd changed everything. At a dusty crossroads called El Guettar, Patton laid a trap. When the 10th Panzer Division attacked what they thought was a weak American position, they ran into a wall of steel. Patton had positioned his tanks hull down behind ridges, artillery zeroed in on every approach. The Germans lost 30 tanks in hours, 5,000 casualties. It was a massacre. Rommel recognized something his fellow generals missed. This wasn't just better tactics or lucky positioning. This was a fundamentally different kind of American general. In his papers, discovered after the war, Rommel wrote that the Americans had a new commander who fought with unprecedented ferocity. He attacked relentlessly and took risks no British commander would consider. Think about that for a moment. Rommel had spent 2 years dancing circles around British generals in the desert. Montgomery frustrated him with caution. Auchinleck confused him with complexity. But Patton? Patton scared him. Because Patton fought like Rommel fought, with audacity, speed, and an almost reckless aggression that turned warfare into jazz improvisation. By late March, less than 3 weeks after first encountering Patton's handiwork, Rommel fired off urgent dispatches to Berlin. He warned Field Marshal Kesselring, Commander-in-Chief South. He alerted General von Arnim, commanding the 5th Panzer Army. He even tried reaching the German General Staff directly. His message was consistent and dire. The Americans had found their Rommel. The German High Command's response? They ignored him completely. Why would professional military officers disregard warnings from their most successful field commander? The answer reveals a fatal flaw that would doom the Nazi war machine. They were fighting the last war, not this one. Colonel General Franz Halder and the German General Staff were obsessed with the Eastern Front. 3 million men locked in deadly combat with the Soviet Union. Stalingrad had just fallen. Kursk loomed on the horizon. To them, North Africa was a sideshow, and the Americans were bit players who'd already proven their weakness at Kasserine. Resources played a role too. Even if they believed Rommel's warnings, what could they do? Every tank, every plane, every competent division was needed against the Russians. Hitler himself had written off Africa, telling his generals to hold as long as possible but expect no reinforcements. But the real reason they ignored Rommel was more personal and more damaging. They thought he'd lost his edge. The desert fox who'd terrorized the British for 2 years was sick, exhausted, and increasingly pessimistic. When he warned about Patton, they heard defeatism, not prescience. General von Arnim, who'd clashed with Rommel over tactics, dismissed the warnings as exaggeration from a commander looking for excuses. They couldn't have been more wrong. Within weeks, Patton's second corps smashed through German positions across Tunisia. His tanks raced through the gaps in German lines that shouldn't have existed. His infantry appeared behind positions thought impregnable. He fought without pause, without mercy, without the gentlemanly agreements that had characterized desert warfare. Rommel, watching from his sickbed in Germany, where he'd been ordered for treatment, could only shake his head. He'd seen this coming. In those 3 weeks of March 1943, he'd recognized in Patton a kindred spirit, a general who understood that in modern warfare, speed kills, audacity wins, and the best defense is a relentless offense. The numbers tell the story. When Patton took command on March 6, the Afrika Korps and their Italian allies still fielded nearly 300,000 men in Tunisia. By May 13th, just 67 days later, 250,000 of them had surrendered. An entire army group destroyed. Veterans who'd fought from Poland to France to Russia, captured by Americans they've been told couldn't fight. But here's what makes Rommel's warning even more remarkable. He didn't just recognize Patton as a dangerous tactical commander. He predicted how the Americans would use him strategically. In those same March dispatches, Rommel suggested Patton would spearhead the invasion of Sicily. He warned that this new general would be unleashed on Europe itself. Again, Berlin scoffed. Again, Rommel was right. 4 months later, Patton's 7th Army stormed ashore in Sicily, racing Rommel's predictions to Palermo and Messina. A year after that, Patton's 3rd Army broke out of Normandy in Operation Cobra, racing across France faster than German commanders thought possible. At every turn, German generals scrambled to respond to tactics Rommel had warned them about in March 1943. The tragedy wasn't that German high command underestimated Patton. Lots of people did that, including some American generals. The tragedy was that they had the intelligence to prepare, delivered by their best commander, and chose to ignore it. They had 3 weeks of warning that could have changed their defensive preparations, their resource allocation, maybe even the timeline of the war. Why does this matter today? Because it's a timeless lesson in military intelligence and human nature. When your best field commander, your most successful general, tells you the enemy has found someone special, you listen. When patterns of warfare suddenly change, when an opponent starts fighting with new aggression and competence, you adapt. Rommel understood something his superiors didn't. Wars aren't won by fighting the enemy you expect. They're won by recognizing the enemy you actually face. In 3 weeks of March 1943, he recognized in George Patton not just a competent commander, but a revolution in American military leadership. The Desert Fox and Old Blood and Guts never met in person. By the time Patton reached Europe, Rommel was defending the Atlantic Wall. By the time Patton broke out across France, Rommel was dead, forced to take poison after the July plot against Hitler. But in those 3 weeks in Tunisia, 2 of history's great military minds touched across the battlefield. One recognized genius, the other embodied it. And the generals who ignored the warning? They discovered what happens when you dismiss intelligence because it doesn't fit your preconceptions. They discovered what Rommel knew after just 3 weeks, that George Patton wasn't just another American general. He was the weapon that would destroy the Wehrmacht in the West. And Rommel saw it coming from 5,000 miles away.